High in the Andes near Lake Titicaca, cut directly into a sheer sandstone cliff, there's a doorway. Not built carved, almost 23 feet wide, with a smaller rectangular niche at its center, just large enough for a person to stand inside. Locals call it Aramu Muru, visitors call it the Gate of the Gods. And after more than a century of study, nobody has ever definitively established who built it, when, or why. Stick around, because by the end of this, you'll understand why the closer researchers look at this doorway, the stranger it gets, and why some of them stop trying to explain it at all. The site sits in a remote valley called Hayumarca, roughly 35 miles from Puno, Peru, at an altitude over 13,000 feet. It wasn't formally documented by outside researchers until the 1990s, despite sitting in plain sight for who knows how long. The doorway is carved from a single continuous rock face, not stacked from blocks like nearly every other major structure in the region. Whoever made this removed material precisely from solid sandstone, cutting a frame roughly 23 feet wide and just as tall. And at its base, a smaller alcove roughly 6 feet high, centered with a precision that doesn't match casual, incidental work. Most major Andean stonework in this region has been dated with reasonable confidence. Tied to known Inca or pre-Inca construction periods, cross-referenced against nearby sites. Aramu Muru doesn't fit cleanly into any of it. Its carving style doesn't match typical Inca masonry technique. It doesn't match older Tiwanaku stonework either, despite Tiwanaku ruins sitting less than 100 miles away. Some archaeologists classify it as an unfinished ceremonial doorway, possibly Inca, possibly earlier. Others simply list its origin as undetermined. There's no inscription anywhere on the surface. No corroborating structure nearby to date it by association. No quarry debris scattered around it, the kind you'd expect from a large-scale carving project. It's just there, a single, isolated, precisely finished doorway in the middle of an empty valley, with no clear evidence of who spent the labor to carve it, or why they stopped where they did. The leading academic theory is that this was a ceremonial threshold, a symbolic gateway used in rituals, possibly linked to sun worship or ancestor veneration, common themes across Andean religious sites. That's plausible, it's also incomplete. A symbolic doorway doesn't need this level of precision. It doesn't need a load-bearing alcove carved to exact human height. And it doesn't explain why, of all the ceremonial sites across the Andes, this specific one attracted a legend so persistent. So oddly specific that it's still actively told today, generations after the doorway was supposedly abandoned. Local Aymara oral tradition fills the gap the archaeological record leaves open. According to the story, after the Spanish conquest, as colonial forces swept through the region hunting for Incan gold, 7 priests fled here carrying a sacred golden disc. Some versions call it the Key of the Gods. Spanish soldiers pursued them into the valley and cornered them against the cliff face, with nowhere left to run. The story says the head priest turned, faced the solid rock, and pressed the golden disc into the small alcove at its base. And the doorway opened. Not a hidden passage revealed, the story is specific that the stone itself became passable, revealing a corridor of light the legend calls the Land of the Gods. The 7 priests walked through, one by one. And as the last one crossed the threshold, the disc remained embedded in the stone, and the gate sealed itself behind them, ordinary rock once more. None of the 7 were ever seen again. The Spanish soldiers, according to the story, found nothing but solid cliff face where a doorway had been moments before. Strip away the golden disc and the passage to another realm, and what's left is a specific, consistent claim, carried by a culture with every reason to remember accurately what actually happened at this cliff. Something occurred here that demanded an extraordinary explanation. Not a vague folk tale about gods in the sky. A grounded, geographically specific account. This cliff, this doorway, these 7 men, this pursuit. Told with the kind of detail that oral traditions usually reserve for events people actually witnessed and needed to make sense of. And Aramu Muru isn't alone. Cultures with no plausible contact carry startlingly similar accounts about specific carved thresholds. In parts of Mesoamerica, oral tradition describes certain temple doorways as places where priests could step between worlds during specific ceremonies. Among some Native American traditions in the American Southwest, certain rock formations are described as spirit doors. Openings used only by those with the right knowledge, sealed to everyone else. In Neolithic Europe, sites like Newgrange in Ireland were deliberately built so that light, and only light on one specific day a year, could pass through a narrow opening into an inner chamber. A threshold aligned with such precision that it still works exactly as designed, 5,000 years later. Different continents, different eras, no contact between them. The same underlying idea, independently. A carved threshold, treated as more than architecture, meant to be crossed only under specific, controlled conditions. The legend hasn't stayed in the past. Local shamans still perform rituals at the alcove today, treating it as an active spiritual site, not a dead ruin. And visitors, independently, across decades, without necessarily knowing each other's accounts beforehand, report the same specific sensations standing inside the niche. Disorientation, a pulling sensation, brief lightheadedness. In some accounts, a feeling of pressure against the chest. These are reported experiences, not measured phenomena. No instrument brought to the site has ever recorded anything outside normal background readings. That matters, and it should be said plainly. There is no physical evidence of anything unusual happening at this location beyond the stone itself. What there is an unusually consistent pattern of subjective experience. At one specific 6-foot-tall alcove, carved with a precision nobody has fully explained, tied to a legend that's remained essentially unchanged for centuries. Researchers have attempted to date the carving using relative erosion analysis, comparing weathering patterns against nearby dated structures. The results have been inconclusive, consistent with a wide range of possible ages spanning many centuries. Ground-penetrating surveys around the base have found no hidden chamber, no cavity behind the alcove. Nothing to suggest the doorway conceals a physical structure, which, depending on how you look at it, either closes the mystery or deepens it. If there's nothing behind the stone, then the precision carving, the consistent legend, and the repeated subjective reports all exist for a threshold that leads nowhere. That's also a claim that needs an explanation. Precision like this, at this scale, isn't typically invested in something with no function at all. The idea that ancient cultures possessed some form of lost technology, capable of applications we don't fully understand today, isn't new. And it isn't universally dismissed by researchers the way pop culture sometimes suggests. Extremely precise stonework exists at multiple sites across South America. Cuts and joins that remain difficult to fully explain, with only the tools historically attributed to the builders. What would need to be true for that idea to apply here specifically is narrower. Not simply skilled masons, but a culture that treated this particular threshold as functionally different from an ordinary doorway. Worth carving with a precision no ceremonial purpose alone would require. The stone doesn't confirm that, it also doesn't rule it out. Today, Aramu Muru is protected as an archaeological and cultural heritage site. Tour groups visit. Shamans still perform ceremonies at the base of the alcove, exactly as they have for generations. The carving is real and still there for anyone to see and touch. The precision is real and still unexplained by any single accepted theory. The absence of a confirmed builder, a confirmed date, or a confirmed purpose is also real. And after more than 30 years of formal study, still hasn't been resolved. The doorway is still cut into that cliff face right now, exactly the shape and size of an entrance to somewhere, waiting, as it has for centuries, for an explanation that fits all of it at